Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show, the political talk podcast from the perspective of the Latinx and other disadvantaged communities. We will not be silenced. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Think of me as if Kevin Hart had a nerdy Puerto Rican brother that he just found out about from his pop. That could be me. Thank you for joining us. We dedicate this episode to a couple people. First of all, Anthony Borges, the last victim of the Parkland shooting, that injured victim, has been released from the hospital. He's a young Latino young man of Venezuelan descent. He's still in tough shape. He's going to have a long road to recovery. But Anthony, estamos contigo, hermano. Get well. Stay strong. We also dedicate this episode to the memories of Sahid Vassell and Stefan Clark, who were homicide victims this week at the hands of the police in New York City and Sacramento, respectively. An anti-apartheid activist and global civil rights icon, Winnie Mandela, who passed away a few days ago. Rest in power. Subscribe to Ray's Talk Show anywhere you can download podcast, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, anywhere you can subscribe to a podcast, or just check us out at rayspodcast.com. Our website has been a little deficient recently. I'm not going to front. We've been a little busy, but we're going to have some new and improved revamp of our website very soon, so look out for that. In the meantime, check us out on Ray's Podcast, or keep the conversation going on social media, on Twitter at Ray's Podcast, Instagram at Ray's Latino Talk, and definitely check us out on Facebook and Instagram. We're going to be doing weekly lives. We had a live earlier this week. You can check out at Ray's Podcast or my personal page, Rafael Collazo, where we get into it and talk about the 5th year anniversary of Ray's Podcast and what it means to me, and some of the exciting things we're planning in store for the next 5 years of Ray's Talk Show. On this episode, I will discuss why the recent announcement related to the U.S. Census is so dangerous and another overt attack to our community. And we are honored to have excerpts from a national town hall that took place recently, led by Latinas that are on the front lines of the climate movement. And I will share some good news out of Costa Rica this week. But first, the latest rantings from a madman. This week, President Trump kept showing his ass by blaming Latinos for a problem that doesn't exist. He claimed the illegal border crossings over the Mexican border were at crisis level, and that there were hordes of Central Americans about to flood over our border. The facts are the facts, and the facts are border crossings are not at a 2-year low or a 7-year low or a 17-year low, but indeed a 46-year low. The New York Knicks won a championship less than 46 years ago. Actually, no, I'm mistaken. It's been about 46 years. I'm so sorry, friends. And the 1,000 or so Central Americans that you're seeing on the news, this horde of people caravanning, are indeed simply seeking asylum from the atrocities of Honduras and other Central American countries. And they're looking simply for help and humanitarian hand from Mexico, from the United States, from anyone that will care for them. And they mean us no harm by their presence. Trump killed DACA and is now ordering the military to assist with border security. Again, a border that is at an all-time, a 46-year low of illegal crossings. You know that relative that you have, that we all have, that has been totally acting unhinged lately because they're paranoid, and they're paranoid because they're about to get nabbed real bad. They've been cheating on their taxes for a long time. Or they've got a couple of, little side people in their life, and they're about to get snagged by their spouse. Maybe a little money laundering. Or a drug problem out of control. Or in the case of our president, maybe you have a special prosecutor or a porn star who's about to blow up your spot. Well, that nut down the block's name is Donald. And as I've said many times on Ray's Talk Show, all he has ever had to sell to Roseanne's Bars America, not Rosie O'Donnell's America, Roseanne Bars America, the misinformed, the willfully ignorant, the oddly entitled, the desperate, the paranoid. All he has left to sell them is what he's always had, hate. It would be pathetic if it didn't cause pain to real people. Because of President Crackpot, families are separated. More people become victims of hate crimes, intimidation, and just the stress of this discrimination. Grippy Kush lied about us today again. We're all rapists, and millions of us voted illegally. Because how could Latinos vote anyway? How could people of Mexican descent be legal when indeed a huge chunk of the United States was Mexico? Or how about the 8 million Puerto Ricans who have been U.S. citizens by federal law for 101 years? The Final Four of basketball was hosted in San Antonio, Texas. And he does it. The saddest part about it, it's one thing if he just hated 2/3 of us and somewhat genuinely cared about the third of the country that's his base. Maybe the saddest thing of his all is he cares just as little for his supporters. The Trump tax, the latest tariffs on China, hurt red state rural America the most. Let's not even talk about the Russian infringement on our democracy, the attack on our First Amendment rights, the lack of action on gun control, or DACA, or the opioid crisis, or Puerto Rico, the vast array of ethical violations by this administration, and all the other racist shit that happens every goddamn day. Remember, Stephon Clark's murder is a local matter, according to this administration. Every moment of anger and frustration we feel must be matched with an action to take down the complicit Republican congressional majorities in 2018. I ask all of you, every day as you're stewing over your café con leche or whatever calms you down, whatever your stress reliever is, yoga, bad reality television, a fifth of something, whenever you're musing with your stress reliever, think about, is everyone eligible in my social circle registered to vote? Are they ready to vote in the upcoming primaries and most importantly in November? How will you make sure they're ready to mobilize to the polls this year in 2018? How will you keep them informed of the stakes, of the issues on the table, of the candidates that maybe while they look nice and they shook your hand at the county fair, the Republicans in Congress are complicit in the destruction of our democracy and the erosion of the civil rights of every single person listening to Race Talk Show right now? Take that anger and that frustration, and most importantly, the love of this country, and channel it into action. It's our only choice, and you are the only hope for our democracy. I now want to share the voices of Latina environmentalists who recently participated in a Latinas Act on Climate Teletown Hall. It was a national town hall that was organized by my day job, the Unidos U.S. Action Fund. You will hear from Congresswoman Nanette Barragan of California's 44th Congressional District. That's Compton, that's the port. Many of the communities and people that are listening to Race Talk Show. And a great friend of the show, Melissa Vargas of the Environmental Defense Fund, who will discuss what's at stake in the current fights in Washington to protect the Clean Power Plan and the progress we have made over the years in the environment. The current EPA Director, Scott Pruitt, who you've seen in the news for all his incredible lack of ethical behavior, he is actively trying to destroy our environment. This man, Scott Pruitt, the EPA Director, Scott Pruitt, is literally a greater public health threat than opioids, than cigarettes, than hard liquor. I mean, this man is a true danger to our country. And these wonderful leaders, Congresswoman Barragan and Melissa Vargas, are going to share why the actions they're taking and more information about the Clean Power Plan and their efforts to protect that plan. And I'll be back later to discuss why the census announcement this week is so important on Race Talk Show. Thank you, Congresswoman Diaz-Barragan, for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I wanted to start by thanking Unidos, the U.S. Action Fund, for inviting me to join the town hall and to speak a little bit on this issue. It's one of my top priorities in going around, not just my district, but the country, to talk about acting on climate change. Now, what I have found in my district, which is California's 44th district, it's very working class. It's about 70% Latino, and it is the very community that is facing a disproportionate impact of what's happening to climate and air pollution. It's just to give you an idea, it's areas like Wilmington and Southgate. Now, it includes the Port of Los Angeles, and it's surrounded by 3 freeways. So you can only imagine what the air pollution is like and the air quality from the trucks, from the ships, from the rail. And to add to that, we have many oil refineries in the district, and so a lot of our communities are living in areas where you have oil drilling and refineries that are only adding to climate change and adding to the pollution. Now, what I have found in my district, which I think is happening more and more, is when I use the word climate change, people sometimes don't pay attention. But when I talk about it as a public health crisis, when I talk about the asthma that the children have, when I talk about, cancer and the increasing rates, all of a sudden, people in our communities of color, especially Latinos, are more engaged. They understand, they can relate, and they start to organize. And I think it's so important that we do this, that we reach out, because the whole idea right now of repealing the Clean Power Plan and replacing it with an inside the fence line approach, which is what the EPA administrator wants to do, he's going to be adding more hardship to the litany of environmental injustices that millions of Americans, especially Latinos across the country, certainly my constituents, are facing. Now, the facilities, such as the ones that are regulated by the Clean Power Plan, are generally next to low-income and minority communities. So failing to limit the carbon pollution from our nation's power plants will also increase threats to health coming from climate change. So without action to cut the carbon, the communities are going to be, they're going to face, hotter temperatures, drier, more pollution, higher respiratory illnesses, asthma, chronic bronchitis. I probably don't have to tell this group what the impact is, but I think we can all be the messengers to try to explain this to our communities so they will mobilize, so they will comment, and really it is through their voice and our collective voice that we have the power to do something and to change action. So I led a letter in Congress with Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman that was signed by 65 members to urge the EPA administrator not to replace the Clean Power Plan with this inside the fence line approach that's been shown to result in increased harm to our communities. We're also sending a letter to the EPA administrator asking him to host a listening session in our district. I think doing this would allow the EPA to hear directly from constituents who undoubtedly feel the negative impacts that would happen of the Clean Power Plan's repeal. I cannot stress how much it is so important that everybody on this call continue to go out and mobilize our communities, making sure that they understand what this means to them, making sure they understand the harmful impacts so that they will be engaged and they will be able to talk to their neighbors and that we could do something. Now, I will tell you, we have had a new challenge, and that is there are people in our communities who, because of immigration policies, are more reluctant to speak out. And so I think that is a concern that is something we need to certainly think about when we're talking to people. But our communities, especially Latino communities, low-income communities of color, are disproportionately hurt by these policies. And so I want to thank everybody on this call for what they're doing, continuing to fight. Call our office if we can partner up on an event, on a rally, on a letter. And my message is to just say thank you, and I appreciate you inviting me to participate today in this important telephone town hall.
So to begin, as Rafa mentioned, my name is Melissa Vargas. I'm with the Environmental Defense Fund, and I'm really grateful to the Unidos U.S. Action Fund for this opportunity to speak with you all today about the Clean Power Plan, which I'm going to refer to as CPP, just so you guys know. I feel like Clean Power Plan is a little bit of a mouthful. But I also especially want to thank each of you on the phone for taking the time out of your busy days, busy evenings to learn more about the CPP and really mobilize about how we can together really make sure that we're standing up for our communities. So in my brief remarks, I'll touch a bit about what the CPP is and why it's so important to the public health and climate security of all Americans, especially to the Latino community. Now, to give you guys a little bit of background, back in August 2015, President Barack Obama unveiled the first CP, like the final CPP. This was setting the first ever national limits on carbon pollution from power plants. And carbon pollution from power plants is the nation's largest source of this type of emissions. It was a historic announcement. The United States said that it is no longer acceptable to put unlimited amounts of climate pollution into our air, which is, this is huge because, as you heard the Congresswoman talking about, this ends up affecting communities in such a grave way. Now, the CPP, it would be reducing carbon emissions from power plant smokestacks, and by doing so, it would also create new opportunities to continue development of the strong, vibrant, clean energy economy that is creating prosperity. Now, the states that join the race first and run it the fastest would essentially win both more investment in clean technologies and win with less air pollution for their communities, which means that we will all benefit from less severe temperature increases, less dangerous sea level rise, and fewer ferocious storms like we've experienced with Hurricane Harvey, Irma, and Maria. Now, the Clean Power Plan was expected to have really huge health benefits, which are now at risk as a result of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA's administrator, Scott Pruitt, who proposed to repeal the CPP back in October 2017. Now, EPA's own analysis of the proposed repeal reported that rolling back the Clean Power Plan would result in up to 4,500 additional premature deaths from air pollution alone by 2030. 90,000 additional childhood asthma attacks, 300,000 additional lost school and work days, and many other health effects, including increased childhood bronchitis, heart attacks, and increased emergency room visits. This ends up really affecting Latinos and Hispanics throughout the U.S. because we already end up living in areas that are high risk for air pollution. Nearly half of Latinos in the U.S. live in cities that frequently violate air quality standards, such as places like the Congresswoman's district in Los Angeles areas, but then we also have cities like El Paso in Texas and Phoenix in Arizona. Now, to the Congresswoman's remarks, Latinos are 60% more likely to visit a hospital for asthma compared to non-Hispanic whites. And Latino children are 40% more likely to die from asthma as compared to non-Hispanic whites. Hispanic and Latino communities are also uniquely at risk from climate change. Climate change is expected to lead to increased air pollution in many high-population areas, contributing to asthma attacks and other respiratory issues that disproportionately affect Latinos. We also know that Latino workers and the communities that depend on them are also uniquely vulnerable to heat waves and other extreme weather events resulting from climate change. Latinos account for 42% of construction laborers and as much as 75% of agricultural field workers in the United States. So the Clean Power Plan is really important in order to make sure that all these folks that work in these areas are also protected from extra pollution and extreme weather. Latino families are also at great risk. Latinos account for the largest share of uninsured individuals, including 12.6 million adults and nearly 3 million children as of 2011. Now, since Scott Pruitt from the EPA announced the repeal, 3 different public hearings have taken place throughout the U.S. There was a public hearing in Kansas City back in February, in San Francisco also in February, and just recently yesterday in Gillette, Wyoming. There was huge turnout going in at these hearings for folks really supporting the Clean Power Plan. And then the public comment period for the proposal is still going to be open until April 26th, which my colleague Amanda will make sure to talk to you more about. To sum my comments, I want to be sensitive with time. We have a lot to cover. I just want to share that Administrator Pruitt also did publish an advance notice in December indicating that the EPA may undertake a new rulemaking to issue a replacement for the Clean Power Plan. However, with this being said, Pruitt has steadfastly refused to commit to issuing a replacement, even though EPA is required by law to limit carbon pollution from power plants. And even if the administrator does move forward with a replacement, he has pretty much given every single indication that he intends to issue an unacceptably weak standard that will fall far short of the protections in the current CPP. So I hope that provides a pretty brief overview on what the Clean Power Plan is, why it's so important to the Latino community and to many other disenfranchised communities, and hopefully gets you a little bit fired up so that we can continue to move on to the next speaker and hear from folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, for that insightful overview. Thank you, Congresswoman Nanette Barragan and Melissa Vargas of the Environmental Defense Fund. And we're going to hear from other Latina environmental leaders later on in the show to discuss what you can do in your local communities, what you can do to raise your voice in the federal federal policy and national conversation about how to protect the environment, how to protect the Environmental Protection Bureau. And so we're going to hear later from some other Latina leaders on climate issues. But I wanted to share, there's another attack that came our way this week from the Commerce Department, announcement that I wanted to make sure people are aware of. They announced recently that the 2020 U.S. Census will include a question on citizenship status. The federal government is saying this is necessary to protect voting rights. Oh, my God. I mean, if it wasn't infuriating, if it wasn't so insulting, it'd be funny. And they point to this question appearing on the forums off and on for centuries, really, as recently as 1950. Let me tell you something. As recently as 1950, I would have been essentially an indentured servant cutting sugarcane in slavish conditions in the hot sun for pennies in Puerto Rico. As recently as 1950, I could vote in the South 10 years before I couldn't have voted in the South like 10 years before I was born. A gay couple couldn't get married legally in many parts of our country until a few years ago. So using American case law on race and civil rights issues from 68 years ago as your defense, I'm sorry, Boppy, that's not going to be like a compelling argument for me. The census is not done every 10 years to count voting age citizens. It's to count everybody so we can allocate resources equitably. It's clear Trump is doing this to intimidate more immigrants and mixed status families from participating in the census, to move more power unequitably, unfairly to red state rural white America. Fortunately, several lawsuits, including one being led by the state of New York and 17 other states, the U.S. Conference of Mayors have jumped into that lawsuit. They're suing to challenge the legality of this question on the U.S. Census. We will see what happens in court. I mean, my best guess is it could go either way. The good thing is it could drag into past 2020, which could keep the question off the questionnaire, at least on this round. But it's clear the president's strategy of half-assing the census all overall. I mean, they don't have a census director. There's no money. Wilbur Ross is asleep most of the time anyway, and he's the commerce director. He has no sense of how to put together a proper census. All of this strategy of half-assing the census is to hurt people of color, working people, young people, and is another attack on our community. As P once said, the Sucka is simple and plain. And there's another rap line, I think, that says, it ain't hard to tell. I think that was Nas. Let's hear from Wildalis Bermudez of Chispa and Amanda Aguirre of Green Latinos from their presentation at the Latinas Act on Climate Teletown Hall that took place recently, featuring literally thousands of Latinos listening in from around the country, participating in that great conversation that I was proud to be a part of through my work at Unidos U.S. Action Fund. And I will be back to wrap up this edition of Ray's Talk Show. This is your moderator, Ray Collazo of the Unidos U.S. Action Fund, and I'm proud to introduce our next speaker here tonight during our Latinas Act on Climate Telephone Town Hall. Wildalis Bermudez is the program director for Chispa, Connecticut, an environmental program of the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters. Wildalis is a fierce advocate for environmental justice issues in underserved communities. Most recently, Wildalis has been working with displaced climate change families arriving from Puerto Rico after surviving Hurricane Maria. Wildalis will share how Chispa is empowering grassroots communities to get engaged in the climate action movement. Thank you for joining us tonight, Wildalis.
Thank you so much for having me. The Chispa program, and Chispa, of course, means spark in Spanish, but the Chispa program has really evolved and is now been carried out in various states. So I do represent Chispa CT. I'm the program director, but we also have Chispa Maryland, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, recently New York, and it continues to expand through, and we are very thankful for the League of Conservation Voters Education Fund to allow us to do this amazing work. The work itself is based on community organizing model and how do we really activate and incentivize our Latino community and our underserved communities in general and our communities of color. And with that, what we do on a regular basis is we ignite a new group of environmental advocates to work on things like clean air, clean water, and public health matters to everyone. And so we understand that oftentimes when we talk about environmental justice communities, we're talking about those communities that are the most underrepresented and the communities that are at most risk in terms of the environmental impacts that they have on the health and the policies that are carried out. And the model that we use is really calling all of our grassroots allies together along with our support from our local community. And we really reach out to the local community and get involved. We have involvement through our parents, activate new parents, also activate students, youth groups, and we set up a structure so that really the parents and the youth and the community can really form and push forward the most important critical environmental injustices that they're facing. In places like Connecticut, if we look at Connecticut as a whole, while we are a very wealthy state, the communities that we work in through Chispa, again, are underrepresented communities and suffer from environmental injustices. So in places like the cities like Hartford and New Haven and Bridgeport, it's where there are placed, for instance, incinerators. It's where we have food deserts. It's where we have power plants. It is where our community is impacted in the harshest ways when it comes to air pollution. We recognize that communities of color and Latino communities and our children do suffer disproportionate rates of asthma. In places like Hartford and other cities throughout, it is our Latino children who have the most missed days of school because of asthma. And so we really do see an alignment, not just bringing together our allies, our health professionals, and our faith groups to work together on common issues, but for example, one of the things that we're working on right now through that lens and bringing folks together is making sure that we have the Healthy Niños clean buses. And so we see this as an opportunity through the Volkswagen settlement funds that are coming to each state to really empower and energize the parents to call for better measures and hopefully to phase out slowly but surely those diesel buses that are causing so much harm and causing emitting more pollution into the air. And so we see different opportunities to have our stakeholders, those who are most impacted by these problems that our communities are facing, bringing them together on different issues. The Healthy Niños for Clean Buses campaign is one example, but overall our model is to provide the support and provide training programs so that by virtue of having the youth and the parents come together, we are really creating the new environmental leaders, and we call them environmental promotores, who then set up committees, comités, who have house meetings and they meet on a regular basis. And by virtue of having that, they're able to bring together other groups involved in other neighbors that they know of. And we really overall see the intersectionality between the environment and the issues that are happening on the ground. We understand and we recognize that our Latino families have various barriers that are placed in front of them. One of them that has already been mentioned tonight has been the undocumented families. There's been another barrier as well, those who are arriving from Puerto Rico and are climate change refugees. And so there's another one as well, another layer on that, which is those in the environmental community that have been, in the Latino community, communities of color that have been saying, I can't breathe for years. And of course, all of this intersectionality between the injustices that are happening in our community really come together, and they encompass a lot of trauma that our communities are dealing with on a daily basis, both health trauma, physical trauma, and lived trauma. But beyond that trauma, our community, we recognize that our Latino community and our communities of color are a resilient community. And every day they fight for making sure that their children have a better place to live. And through the support of programs like Chispa and having a broader network and really pushing their state legislature to vote in appropriate ways, and as well as at the national level, they are able to really get others and their own neighbors involved in a bigger way and have a broader effect. We understand also that in this process, there are so many families that are now arriving from islands like Puerto Rico because of the impacts of the devastating effects of Hurricane Maria. And what better example do we have to point to on why we must help our environment, and why we need to make sure that we are able to be the stewards of our planet and to fight for the things that we need, when so many families have been on the front line in Puerto Rico of being completely displaced. Measures like the Clean Power Plan are extremely important to make sure that other families who are arriving, and there will be more arriving from Puerto Rico because of the rising sea levels, because of the contamination on the island of Puerto Rico and other islands that are being impacted. We have to make sure that we call on this administration to really protect our air and our land and climate pollution overall. We must reduce the carbon pollution, and that's why we, through our work of Chispa, we recognize that the Latino community and the communities of color that we work with on a daily basis, we will continue fighting and making sure that we are able to push forward just practices and policies that we can say we will be able to continue to help our children. And we know that as Latinos, our parents, and in some cases our grandparents, and if not, their grandparents worked off the land. Our ancestors were the caretakers of this planet. They were farmers, they were fishermen, and certainly we have that in our blood, and we will continue to do the work with great programs like Chispa.
Thank you, Wildalis, and thank you all for joining us tonight on this evening's Latinas Act on Climate Telephone Town Hall, featuring Latina leaders who are sharing how climate change impacts our community and ways we can all act on climate. I would now like to introduce Amanda Aguirre, the Executive Vice President and CEO of Green Latinos. Amanda has extensive national experience in community organizing and campaign work, and previously has served in the Obama administration as the EPA's Acting Director of Public Engagement and Environmental Education. Amanda will be sharing with us tonight our call to action and how we can all have our voice heard in the Clean Power Plan debate through the EPA's comment collection process. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, Rafa, and I just wanted to express my sincere appreciation for Unidos US for creating the space to have this important conversation and being a leader on this issue. I'm going to keep my remarks brief so that we can have some time for conversation. I want to start off by saying that I'm so honored to be in such great company, and I'm truly inspired to hear the voices of so many strong Latinas standing up to safeguard the health of our communities. As mentioned, I'm COO and Executive Vice President of Green Latinos. Green Latinos is a national network of Latino environmental and conservation advocates who are committed to addressing the national and local environmental issues that affect the health of our communities. Our members are members of individuals, so that means you could be a Green Latino working for a green group. You could be a mother in a Green Latino. You can be an abuela in a Green Latina. You can be working at a environmental organization, like I said, but also at a Latino organization and all over the country. Green Latinos is part professional and part policy. So we seek to create an inclusive community that empowers and supports Latinos in the green space. And we advocate on key issues driven by our members, such as toxics and pesticides that affect farm workers, clean water, public lands, and climate and clean air. Green Latinos members and allies and organizations like Unidos US, Chispa, EDF, and others have been at the forefront of the Clean Power Plan and speaking about this issue. They were there when President Obama first released this, saying the importance of making it happen, and they have been there speaking out when this ridiculous repeal was announced. Members have been out speaking out. Melissa mentioned this previously about hearings. Latinos have been out testifying and speaking on how this repeal is harmful for their families, from West Virginia to Kansas City to San Francisco. And I'm encouraged by all of you who are on the phone today who are committed and willing to take the time to speak out. The facts you've heard on this call are not just words and numbers to me, and they're not to many in our community. I was born in Los Angeles and raised in Houston. I watched my baby brother sit inside as a child with asthma, unable to play like he should because of poor air standards and poor air quality. I was raised in Houston, and I have, my husband and I have over 40 family members there recovering from Hurricane Harvey after this year's storms. I, like many in our community, have spent nights praying for protections from storms, for help for recovery, for reasonable temperatures outside, or simply for safe air and water for our communities. Unfortunately for us and for me, the story is not unique. Many are worse off, and this is simply unacceptable. As mentioned by the other Latinas on this call, the staggering rates of asthma in our community, and knowing that we are hit first and worst when it comes to climate change and related disasters, means that we need to rise up and act now. The Clean Power Plan is a central proposal to mitigate the effects of climate change, and it is being threatened. Use your voice and let the EPA and Scott Pruitt know that the Clean Power Plan should not be repealed, and the health of our communities need to be protected and should not be on the chopping block. You can do this right now by visiting www.greenlatinos.org/CPP_repeal and make a comment right now. You have till April 26th. I'm going to say it again. You have till April 26th to hop online and make your comments and let them know that this is unacceptable. As Rafa mentioned, you can let your concerns be known on social media using the hashtag Latinos for CPP or hashtag Latinas Act on Climate. And if you've simply had enough with Administrator Scott Pruitt, like I have, and many other organizations have, you can join us today. Green Latinos and other organizations, including EDF, LCV, demanded Scott Pruitt to resign because he is not doing our job to safeguard our communities and the public health of this nation. You can use the hashtag #BootPruitt and let him know exactly how you feel. Before I turn it back over, I just want to say that I hope you don't stop there. Don't just stop on social media. Don't just stop on comments. Make that your first step. Don't undervalue the importance of your own sphere of influence, your families, and your community. Share what you know and what's at stake. We need everyone in this fight together if we're going to do it for our community. So thank you again.
Thank you again, Wildalis and Amanda. And again, thanks to Unidos U.S. Action Fund and Climate Action Campaign for allowing Ray's talk show to share those audio excerpts from the Latinas Act on Climate telephone town hall that took place recently. Great group of Latina leaders, and I believe the Representative Barragan is the first member of Congress to appear on Ray's talk show. I had to think about that. But anyway, certainly historic, and we wish her well in her future endeavors and really appreciate her leadership in particular and all the wonderful Latinas that are engaged in the environmental movement. A good piece of news I wanted to share on this episode of Ray's talk show. Recent presidential elections took place in Costa Rica that resulted in the victory of presidential candidate Carlos Alvarado Quesada, a former labor leader who defeated an evangelical minister who built his campaign in opposition, largely on his opposition to same-sex marriage. That was Fabricio Alvarado Munoz. Alvarado versus Alvarado there. But what was most significant about the election was actually down ballot as part of his team. Alvarado's victory also led to the victory of his vice presidential candidate, Epsy Campbell, an economist, who's now become the first Afro-Latina vice president of a country in Latin America. Costa Rica has a significant black population, largely due to the West Indian migrations of the 20th century. Campbell's grandparents are indeed Jamaican immigrants themselves. Felicidades, Epsy Campbell. This is a victory for all black women leaders throughout the hemisphere. Epsy has an impeccable resume, and we're excited to see her leadership, not only for Costa Rica, but the Americas. And we would love to have her one day on Ray's talk show. So she's showing incredible leadership, has an incredible personal story, and we're really happy for her leadership being properly acknowledged in the elections in Costa Rica. And a note to a great friend that we want to help encourage to get out the vote for. If you live in Whittier, California, I know there's some people out in Whittier listening to this, the home of Nomar Garcia Parra and other ballers. Come out next Tuesday in your local elections to support our great friend Lisette Escobedo, longtime activist, even as a young person. Lisette is trying to make history herself in Whittier during her run to become a member of city council. I was in touch with her brother recently and a great friend to the show, Efrain Escobedo, who many of you would know from his work in history and civic engagement and other issues. He says Lisette's doing great, but the old guard don't want to give up their power. So if you're listening from Whittier, California, if you live in Southern California near Whittier, everyone's got a cousin in Whittier. I know if you live in the LA area, get out, call, let your friends know to come out for Lisette Escobedo on Tuesday. And thank you all again for listening to Ray's Talk Show. Please subscribe and let us know what you think. Check us out on iTunes. Again, anywhere you download a podcast, Spotify, SoundCloud. The list goes on and on. Remember what I said earlier. Pour that anger, that spirit of resistance, and get your team ready to vote. Mueller has his job, and we have ours. Gracias, mi gente, and have a wonderful weekend.